Tonight's program is by Professor Douglas Gill. He will share his history and early results of restoring habitat for grassland birds, especially grasshopper sparrows. Dr. Gill received his Ph.D. in Evolutionary Ecology from the University of Michigan. He has been on the faculty of the Department of Biology at the University of Maryland since 1971 and is now a Professor Emeritus there. And he has led scientific expeditions all over the world from Alaska to Antarctica. So take it away, Doug.
Well, thanks very much, Kristen, and thanks for you all coming. It's always an honor. I think the last time I gave a talk here was, what, 12 years ago? Always a pleasure. But this talk was stimulated by Kristen and John and others bringing to my attention their work and leadership on doing some grassland restoration work, especially for birds in Howard County. And we had a delightful, it was a bit rainy, trip there in the winter. But so in keeping with that, this is very much a talk geared to give some information, updates really on the results of now nearly 24 years of work that I started and now is in the capable hands of Dan Small and Marin Gimple. So I think probably the best thing to do is start. So let me see if I can share my screen in this way and then go over here. Okay, is it up visible for everybody?
I can see it fine, yeah.
Yep, I can see it too.
Okay, well, great. So the talk will be in three parts, just to give a broad overview of the whole thing. One is to give you a background for those of you who have not had the opportunity to go out and visit the grassland project there on the Eastern Shore, the background and the motivations and so on. And the second part is to just give the highlights of three of the birds that have played a major role in our thoughts and our protocols of habitat management. And then the third part is just to share some particular mistakes we've made that I hope others don't make, and thoughts on how to manage better than what we've done. It was been a very, very exciting experience for me, arguably one of the most exciting chapters in my life. So those are the three parts. And to start, the first part is, yes, so why are we doing this? Well, it's what we all know is the rapidly declining population. So here are Maryland's meadowlark, and it's from 1966. It's just been plummeting throughout. And that's been true for all grassland birds. So here, 8 grassland birds up at the top, grasshopper sparrows and bobolinks and the like, and as listed in several states. And you can see that they're endangered or special concerned or threatened or something. So why are grassland birds declining? Well, I should comment first is that the decline in grassland birds has put grassland birds, on the top of the IUCN list. They are the ones who have been declining more than any other. And why are they declining? And I think the thing to start or just give some perspective of why this is happening is to consider the history of the mid-Atlantic region. So in pre-colonial times, to most people's surprise.
Yeah, 96.
Oh, okay. So you want to mute there? Okay. See, should I cancel out of the videos? Let me see. Okay, well, whatever. I have the Zoom band up in the top, which is blocking some of things. Is that true for others? No, probably just me. Okay, well, anyway, in pre-colonial times, it comes as a real surprise, I think, to most people, that the landscape was not full of old growth forest the way I was taught and most people were taught. And it simply was not the case that squirrels could hop merrily from the top of the oak trees from Massachusetts to the Mississippi River. The dominant habitat throughout the eastern United States, and especially the mid-Atlantic region, was a pine grassland savanna. It was maintained by fires. Most of that fire was indigenous as part of the culture of the indigenous people. There were elk and bison out in here on the eastern shore, as well as in the Piedmont and in the Appalachian areas. Yes, and big predators and so on. And it comes as a surprise, I think, that the indigenous people were active farmers and they had extensive cultivation and irrigation systems of a wide variety. Now, tobacco, of course, and white Europeans, when they invaded the place, loved their tobacco and just continued on that, as well as making hay fields. And the hay fields were in part because much of the landscape under the tutelage of the white Europeans was pasture for cattle. So it was a cattle world, and primarily where the Texas cattle were being brought up to this region, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, for fattening for the Baltimore and Philadelphia and New York and Washington markets. So the place was carpeted. What had been prairie grassland now was converted into carpets of Eurasian cold season grasses to feed those Eurasian livestock and the like. But right after World War II, that cattle industry pretty much evaporated very quickly and was replaced with row crop agriculture, corn and soybeans and cereal grasses of various kinds, and often by modern precision farming. So the landscape had changed, and it was this conversion of going from pastures for cattle to row crop agriculture that led to the recent sharp declines of the grassland birds. So no longer did you have pastures and fences for the meadowlarks and bobolinks and others they set up on, but you now had row crops with no hedgerows, no fences, just growing right up there. And that's the world that you and I know together. Now, that's happened all over the world. So it turns out native grasslands are the rarest habitat in the world, despite the fact that that was the dominant ecosystem in Eastern North America, but it's now essentially extinct. So the goals of this project that started in 1998 by a phone call from the owner of the largest farm asking for my assistance to convert his farm into wildlife habitat. And I told him, well, let's do grasslands. We can do more for more species of butterflies and birds, wildlife in general, if we consider grasslands rather than more forest and the like. So the idea was to try to recreate something similar, a facsimile of the pre-colonial habitat that's extinct, and to reverse the population patterns, the declines of birds, and maybe bring them up. So yeah, to take the metaphor of taking swords and converting them into plowshares. The basic idea is to take cornfields that are prevalent throughout the East and Eastern Shore and convert them into grasslands. Many of you have been out there, or some of you have been, I know, but the location is in the northern portion of the Queen Anne's County on the Eastern Shore. And it is on the property of the largest farm in Maryland, over 6,000 acres. And the benefit of this is that the owner and the farm manager are really enthusiastic about doing their farming in an ecologically friendly way. And for that purposes, they've put nearly all, 99% of that property into easements. Yes, in crop production, still active, eco-friendly production, but it's under rural legacy, protected under rural legacy. And 2/5 of the property are wildlands. There's old growth forest. There's 3 miles of shore along the Chester River, and our grasslands. So this project, starting in 1999, has been a thrill to work with the cooperation of the owner and the brilliant farm manager in particular. And yes, and won a National Audubon Society Important Bird Area in 2009. Now, those 6,000 acres are not all contiguous, so the yellow bands show where they are, and it is in this fragmented landscape of agriculture and woodlots and houses on the eastern shore. But what I'll be talking about tonight is this chunk of land right up against the Chester River that looks kind of like a fish. It actually kind of looks like a fish there, and it's 220 acres, and this project was started in 1999. Many of you know it as Chino Farms or Chester River Field Research Station, but the whole operation now, especially since my retirement from the University of Maryland, the administration is now in Washington College, under the auspices of the Center for the Environment and Society. And that our research area is now called the River and Field Campus. So you'll see RAFC regularly. For particular details about the programs at Washington College and CES, there's a website, Washington College Learn by Doing, CES, RAFC. Now this project, yes, I started it and hired a bunch of students and but the whole thing has been a teamwork. So I only take credit for some of the scientific management, stuff like that. But it's a team with Dr. Sears, the owner of the property, and Evan Miles as farm manager, and a long list of, that's up over 100 students and researchers, everything. Jared Parks and Jason Garrard were major leaders at the beginning, and now Dan Small and Marin Gimple, whom many of you know and have met, are the current full-time leaders of this whole project. The project benefited from financing from several sources, including the owner, but also incentive programs by the Department of Agriculture through their Conservation Reserve Program, and the state of Maryland in their Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program. Well, I'm an experimental ecologist, and my whole approach of this was to approach the idea of creating an ecosystem, a grassland ecosystem that is effectively extinct out of all this agricultural land. I had no template, I had no example to work from. So the whole thing has been an experiment of trial and error. But to set it up as an experiment, the 228 acres were divided into 12 packages of varying size and to be replicates. So we'd put experimental treatments of grassland restorations in replicas, so 3 and 5, 2 and 7, and 1 and 6. And into those, we bought out the entire stock of native warm season prairie grasses from a supplier and here there were 10 of them altogether, ranging in height, and some were tall and some were short. And they included big bluestem, which is the poster child of tall grass prairies in the eastern portion of the Great Plains and switchgrass, which is the poster child of biofuel interest as a alternative for corn oil. So into those fields they went with short species of grass, little blue stem, eastern gamagrass, Cytosperma and so on, into fields 1 and 6, and tall species, a big blue stem and Indian grass went into fields 3 and 5, and so on. So we put assortments of the grasses into the fields as I say, 6 treatments, 2 replicates each, and so on. Well, it was astounding. Neither I nor the owner or anyone expected the instant success and thrilling results that we got right away. Within 2 years, we had a spectacular prairie. It was unbelievable to see how magnificent this thing was after 2 years. And within 6 years, we had already counted 265 species of plants. This was amazing. Both the owner and I thought it was going to take decades before gusts of wind were going to bring in a little a seed or 2 or bird's foots or would bring in some others. But no, we had to. Now, the problem is, where did these plants come from? Because mind you, we only put in 10 species of warm season grasses, and yes, a couple handfuls of pretty prairie plants, coneflowers and the like. But 265, where did they come from? Well, the first huge surprise for us was this all came out of the soil. Each year, more came up at the seed bank that was in the soil of this property that had this incredible history, as they say, of intense human work, tobacco and pastures and agriculture. Traditional and modern precision was astounding. The seed bank is just infinitely rich with the abundance of seeds and a huge diversity of seeds. And this is what we saw in those first 6 years. Every year, 20 or more new species would arrive. We'll talk about these a little bit more later, but there was, 2/5 of them were exotics and 3/5 of them were natives. It was just astonishing. Excuse me. Every year, new species of plants arise. For example, just last August, Dan found a stand of at least 18 stems of a rare orchid. There's Spiranthes lacera, the slender lady's tresses. Good heavens, where did this come? After 23 years, how could there possibly be a stand of things? We've crisscrossed and searched. We know it was not there before. Just amazing. Well, we naively, of course, thought that the grasslands, once we had a prairie, would take care of itself, but that was, of course, nonsense. Despite my training as an ecologist. And yes, management was certainly necessary, and there's certainly a list of management tools that would be possible, but we chose prescribed fire simply because, as I said, the history of the landscape in pre-colonial times, only 400, 500 years ago, was being maintained. The grasslands was being maintained by fires. So we set up a program, a set of protocols to burn 1/3 of the grasslands every year and rotate it from different parts of a field. So we would have a succession of recently burned and older burned, creating different habitats for the grassland species. Yes, the program we all had bird interests, and so the pattern of our work had protocols of catching every bird, banding them all, catch them primarily with mist nets. Because they would be known, students and I, we would follow each bird and record what stalk they were perched on, plot them, find their nest, plot all this information on the computer ArcView maps. The floristics teams of students led by me or Ed Schwartzman or other botany people would be censusing the fields constantly for what species were there and measuring their densities with quadrat sampling. So that's the background of this project. Some of you know some of the details about that, others don't. I can pause here briefly if someone had a question about those highlights of the history and the procedures. Kristen, are there any questions coming into the chat box? We should only take one or two so we aren't here all night.
I'm not seeing anything in the chat right now.
Okay.
If anyone has a question, just post it in the chat or raise your hand.
I get
Maybe we can move on.
Okay, fine. Well, you're all particularly interested in birds. I'm particularly interested in birds, well, as plants as well. So I thought I'd give you highlights of 3 of the species that this project has become well known for: grasshopper sparrow, dickcissel, and bobwhite, just as 3, given the time that we have here. And as I say, the whole thing was designed for birds, and using that phrase from the famous movie Field of Dreams, you know, if you build a habitat, will they come? And the answer is yes, they did. And especially grasshopper sparrows, which you'll hear in a moment. And they came quickly, including dickcissels. And the management procedures produce fabulous results. Oops, I'll go back. For bobwhite quail and others. So yes, the project got off to a roaring start in great ways. Well, over the first 19 years of the project, as you say, we had an effort to capture every bird and get them banded, and we banded all the adults. So we, even by 2017, I've chosen that as a particular marker, gosh, look at that, 4,500 individual grasshopper sparrows got banded, 2,600 field sparrows, hundreds of dickcissels bobbling. It has been a story. As many of you know, the bird banding, the process of bird banding and getting to know every individual bird personally, just bears all kinds of fruits. And so this project has established an amazing array of North American records, including longevity records. Often people ask, how long does a grasshopper sparrow live or something? Well, here it is, a list of the North American records for the longevity of birds. There it is, had an 8-year-old thing. Now, it wasn't the record, but we now have the record of it. Look at that, a 10-year-old yellowthroat. Who would ever imagine a yellowthroat would live that long? We had the world's record of grasshopper longevity, but it was broken this year by us. Really by Marin and Dan, I should give credit to. This year, male RL SX was caught and in July, and he was first banded as an adult in 2014. And because he was an adult, he was either born the previous year or some years earlier. Yeah, there it is. Another world record on the grasshopper sparrow. Well, grasshopper sparrow has been the primary bird that caught our attention. It, like all other grassland birds, has had a catastrophic drop in its population by the breeding bird surveys over the years. And yes, it's listed in most of the eastern states here. In particular, curiously, it's not yet listed in Maryland, but it will be. So grasshopper sparrows came pouring in by the hundreds in the first 3 months of 1999, soon after we had planted all those warm season grasses. We don't know exactly how many came in that year because we spent much of the summer trying to figure out how do you catch grasshopper sparrows in a landscape that's just dirt and fallen over corn stalks from last year. Well, it turns out grasshopper sparrows are not very bright. If you put up mist nets in the middle of wind and nothing surrounding them, at all, they will fly into them and get caught. So yeah, we caught 50 and 21 or so that first year, but the next year we found that we could catch them all, and the numbers were sustained. So we've had in the neighborhood of a decade and a half of about 80 grasshopper sparrow pairs. And for that reason, all this while, we thought we had a sustained population. But soon after 2013, the numbers have plummeted. And indeed, this year, there were only a couple pairs that were still out on these grasslands. It's very frustrating because despite our best efforts, and we have suitable habitat, but they are simply not arriving to our suitable habitat the way they did back in 1999. But to illustrate how our management practices can influence very local densities, this is a typical map of all the waypoints from our GPS. As you can see, Jared is there recording the location of birds that we captured, and you can see they're dense everywhere. And I wanted to call your attention particularly to field 7 that was burned in the spring of 2003, and so there we had lots of grasshopper sparrows in that field. But look what the picture of the distribution of those grasshopper sparrows were the following year in 2004. Not a single grasshopper sparrow set up a territory or nested in field 7 just 1 year after its major burn. But to point out what a major burn, well, fields 4 and 8 were burned in the spring of 2004, and you look where all the grasshopper sparrows. So the impact of our prescribed fire management produces dramatic results of where you're going to find individual breeding pairs and territorial grasshopper sparrows. As I say, banding is fabulous because you get to know the individuals well. This is a migratory species, so they pull out and go someplace south. Unfortunately, we have never had anybody recover one of our grasshopper sparrows in the southern. We think they're in this along the coast of the United States, Alabama and Florida, but we don't know. We have not yet had a successful recovery of any of our birds, but they come back. They come back to our property from wherever they are, and each year, the majority of the males are individuals we know. They often go to the same plot of land that they did the previous year. Over a third of the females are known females, for adult females from previous years. But the most astonishing numbers that we've been getting is the return of nestling grasshopper sparrows. Normally, you never get to see your banded nestling birds. They disappear. You never see them. If you get 1 or 2% of your nestling birds, great, but not these grasshopper sparrows. Our return rate on average over the 17 years here is has been 12%. In some years, as you can see, 19% of them came back, 18%, an astounding recovery or return rate of nestling grasshopper sparrows. So wherever they are, they liked our little 220 acres of grasslands. Breeding success always seemed good, seemed high. 63% of the nests were successful at producing young, but as it turns out, that was simply not enough to sustain our grasshopper sparrow colony, even though it was great for a decade and a half. And it's the same graph you saw before of how the numbers we have now are very, very few. Sad result. Don't quite know what the reason is, but the guess is that we have excellent habitat out there for grasshopper sparrows, but they are not arriving the way they once did. Well, moving on to a success story is the bobwhite quail. Dr. Sears and this property has always prided themselves in having a vibrant and wonderful bobwhite quail population. And those of you who've been out there, it is just a joy to hear in the morning, to hear bobwhite quail calling their bobwhite call. But many of you, as you know, even though we had 24 calling birds in there 2009, many of you remember the incredible double whammy pair of blizzards in February 2010 that had 3 feet of snow. So the fields were 3 feet deep with snow. It was incredible. And that just wiped out. We didn't hear any bobwhite quail that summer, but we did hear a couple in the fall, and the survival was it was just tragic to go to tramp through the snow, go to bushes where there'd be 24 dead bobwhite quail at the base of the bushes that simply couldn't get out of the steep slopes of the snow on either side. But the good news is, look at this, they just recovered on their own. Each year, the numbers just increased, and by 2016, we had numbers that were exactly like what had been back in 2009, and now the numbers are even greater than before. So this is an interesting story of how an acute storm like that blizzard of February 2010 can just totally obliterate a population, but they can recover from the few birds that hurt. This is promoted or stimulated a redesign of our management program for bobwhite quail, and particularly to experiment with fall burnings and with spring burnings on smaller parcels for the bobwhite quail. So I encourage you to invite Dan Small he's been the leader of this whole bobwhite restoration project. So by all means, get the full story from Dan. Now, the third bird I want to mention is an extraordinary story in itself too, and this concerns the dick thistle. So I was very happy to hear the report on the dick thistles that you were having there in Howard County. Dick thistle, as you know, is fundamentally a rare bird. Its primary population is there in the central United States. They do show up, and yes, some individuals do show up. I can tell you that I'm certain that was an abundant and common bird in pre-colonial times in this area. But with the elimination of the eastern prairies, that it no longer is here at all. But nevertheless, in the second year of our study in 2000, lo and behold, dick thistles arrived out of nowhere. They certainly weren't there before on the corn stalks or anything. We know that. But there were 16, 8 males, 8 females showed up. In 20, we were jubilant, but even more amazing is the return of these dick thistles. So one of those males from 2000 came back the following year, and yes, we had already put color bands on him, PP-YX. I called up Chan Robbins right away and said, Chan, hey, we have a dick thistle male that banded is returned. He was jubilant to hear this news because he said, Doug, you've just established a new record. This is the first known individual dick thistle ever to return to the state of Maryland. Well, he returned the next year. So we continue to be thrilled that this migratory bird going down to South America was returning to our 220 acres. But the story was even more extraordinary. One of the 7 nestlings that was born in 2005 returned as a breeding female. We then slapped color bands on her, and so she's the famous MM-PX. That established an astonishing record. Never before had anybody, according to the Bird Bending Lab, recaptured a nestling dickcissel as a breeding adult the following year. It just seems extraordinary that all the work that's done in the Great Plains, nobody had ever recaught any of their nestling grasshoppers. Now here we are in Maryland on this experimental grasslands doing so. Well, MXPX not only set that record, but she came back every year for the next 7 years to breed and established even more amazing records. So she established the longevity record. I already said she was the first nestling ever captured as a breeding adult. She established the fecundity record of more nests and more young produced. But one of the amazing features is, look, she was born there in the east end of Field 5, and all her nests for the next 7 years were within 200 meters of where she had been born. So she established a fidelity record. Unbelievable. She was a great gal. So we had this amazing colony of dickcissels, breeding, producing lots of young, returning every year, but something amazing, and I don't have any explanation for it in particular, is right after the group in 2013, we have never had a breeding dickcissel on our grasslands since. So here we are, 9 years later, and they've evaporated. That's not quite true. Dan and Maren have heard flyovers, but they have never settled down to be breed or set up territories again. Really interesting that this is basically the same year, 2013, was the last good year for grasshopper sparrows and now dickcissels. Curious. Well, the grasslands have matured. They look very different than what many of you might have seen them back a decade or two ago. And we do have thriving populations of grassland birds of a great assortment. Yellow-breasted chat has really moved in to join the blue grosbeaks. So that's the thing. But I should comment on birds that failed to come. I had thought that this was my first bird was going to be eastern meadowlark. But no, it has never come as a breeder onto these grasslands after these 24 years. We've had two small populations over winter groups, but they've never come in to breed. And this is astonishing to me. As many of you know, one of the prized birds to try to get back onto the eastern shore would be Henslow sparrow. Some of us old folks used to go down to Elliott Island to see our Maryland Henslow sparrow, and we sure have tried hard to create habitat that would be suitable for their return and to build their population. But no, Henslow sparrow has never come. We keep on hoping, and we keep hoping they will say, please come. Many of you know and have enjoyed the rarities that have shown up on the grasslands over the years. That northern shrike was great. The one-day wonder of a Say's Phoebe, and many of you probably enjoyed the golden crowned sparrow just 2 years. And I'm sure everybody can identify this bird in the upper left-hand corner. What is that? Do I hear a deafening roar? A LeConte sparrow, right? And I chose one of the pictures that was blurry deliberately to make you have a little trouble identifying that. But anyway, so we've had some interesting rarities. The third part of the talk is, we'll go quickly. I can pause maybe briefly if there are any questions that have come in on the chat box, but make it one or two so that we can finish up in good time.
Any questions, anyone?
Tristan?
Not seeing anything.
I had a question.
Go ahead,
Okay.
Jay.
Didn't the shrike come back a second winter or third winter?
Oh, seven winters. It returned and returned and returned for 7 winters. No, it was great. It was banded, so we know it was the same bird. Yeah, that was amazing. Sight fidelity on that northern shrike.
Anyone else?
Well, then why don't I proceed? And
Sure.
now this third part is really for the benefit of those of you in the Howard County Bird Club who are, actively now in discussion of how to manage and deal with the grassland parcels that you have available for you. So I want to just bring this particular slide back to call your attention to those 261 or more plants and those 105 exotics that appeared, new ones kept on appearing. Because I, as the scientific director at the time, had to make the decision, okay, these are exotics. Everyone is frantic and hysterical about invasive species. Should I be taking some careful action on this, and what am I going to do this? It was likely that some of these exotics would have positive features, provide nectar or something. So it was a trying moment to decide what to do with these exotics, and would any of them become invasives? And the answer, astonishingly, the unbelievable surprise, and it's been true for now the 24 years that we've been working out there, is that none of the exotics have ever become invasive in our grasslands. None of those 105 have ever been a problem. Our problems, our concerns of invasive, aggressive species have all been native species. And just to give that list here. So at the beginning, the first couple of years, I was worried about a spread of rabbitfoot's clover and Johnson grass and Canada thistle. As many of you know, Johnson grass and Canada thistle are listed in the state of Maryland, as they are in many states, as a noxious weed. And a landowner has to show evidence of removing Johnson grass and Canada thistle if it's found on this property. And inspectors come by now and then and asking, well, how are your Johnson grass? But neither of those have been a problem. And yes, we've pulled them as necessary, even though, gosh, the butterflies love Canada thistle. But it's the native species been our major headache. And that include both the switchgrass and the big blue stem, those poster child prairie grasses that have just been aggressive thing. Trumpet creeper, oh my gosh. Who would have expected that lovely vine along in hedgerows and along the edges would become an invasive that gobbled up a quarter of our grassland in short order. New ones are coming along, hairy sunflower. Black locust and deer tongue were easily taken care of at all. But the switchgrass, oh my gosh, what a problem that has been. So within just a couple years, field 4 and field 8 really just became a monoculture of switchgrass. So we immediately mounted actions of plowing it up and digging it, and yes, and using sprays on it to try to reduce it. Yes, we reduced it, but it just came right back up. We did the same, and it's right back up. So the grasslands, as you see it, ever really since 2010, have looked like this. They basically, big blue stem has become the monocultures of fields 2, 3, and 5, for example. And switchgrass that we in fields 4 and field 8, it's just a monoculture of them. And trumpet creeper has taken over the eastern portion of the Grand. And yes, Trump is a major pest, no matter how you look at it. That is what is consuming all our time and energy, is trying to reduce those three species. So why had they become so dominant and so thick? The first reason is we had vastly overseeded big blue and switchgrasses. Yes, they were the poster child, as I say, of prairie grasses, and this is the recommended seeding rate of 8 pounds per acre, but even those, we only put 2 pounds of big blue stem in each of those fields and 2 pounds of switchgrass. But the problem is the recommendations from the Department of Agriculture is based on poundage, and a pound of switchgrass seeds, which are tiny, is tens of thousands of switchgrass seeds. It's one of these stupid protocols of the department's recommendations of planting grasslands. So the seeding rate was just far too big, creating a density. Switchgrass then is rhizotomous and it grows and they throw down more seeds. So if you ever put in switchgrass, you're never going to be able to get it out. We haven't been able to get ours out at all. As a consequence, then 6 of the original prairie grasses that we put in are gone. We no longer have the gamma grasses and we no longer have Indian grass and so on. There are probably some stems still left somewhere. In terms of protocols, in terms of management tools, yes, what we did was to use prescribed fires, and we continue to use prescribed fires, tweaking them in fall burns and spring burns and controls of no burns and so on. But now what we have been thinking for a long time is to consider using large herbivores. If you remember at the beginning, I said that, yes, there were elk and bison out here in the eastern United States, including including the eastern shore. And wherever they are, especially out in the Great Plains, they were major habitat, environmental keystone animals, structuring the habitat in a major way. I won't talk a lot about our plans. I'll just make a couple comments in there. But new protocols that we would like to have there, it's in the talking stage still, is adding 4-legged mowers. Cattle would be fine to rotate them on the grasslands to eat down the switchgrass and the big blue. Goats would be terrific to use on eating all that trumpet creeper. All of those would be just great in their hoof work to create dirt habitat. That would be great for eastern meadowlark and grasshopper sparrows. And we used to have breeding horned larks and killdeer, but no, we don't have those now. And it would be great to use these management creatures to create that habitat for those. But a quick comment on the bison. I've dreamed about using bison and out there, and for the very simple reason, I did already say that bison were out there in pre-colonial times. Bison would be fabulous for controlling the big blue stem switchgrass, much better than cattle, because 80% of the preferred diet of bison is in fact big blue stem. That's what they do. So after a big prairie fire out in the Midwest, in Iowa or North Dakota, up would come the new sprouts of big blue, and in would come thundering herds of bison. That's what they love to eat, is big blue stem. And that was the management feature of pre-colonial grasslands. Beneficial, there are several, I can count 8 bison farms nearby. Bison products have become a very popular thing these days. And I'm talking to some of those bison ranchers. They would love to bring their bison over and to eat my big blue stem, but it's still in the talking stage. It's really been backburnered. Lots of issues of trying to have bison out there. So in short, in summary, I want to say that a diverse flora appeared miraculously from the rich seed banks that were already out there. So it turned out it was just fundamentally a mistake to put any prairie grasses out there, to plant anything, because the soil itself provides all you really need. Birds, they found it. They found our grasslands and they colonized and they prospered but curiously only for a decade or more. And despite our intense efforts to manage and make suitable habitat for them, our colonies were just not sustainable. Currently, yes, yellow-breasted chats and blue grosbeaks and field sparrows are going gangbusters out there, but not the grasshopper sparrows and the dickcissels. Our principal management tool has been to use fire to reduce and eliminate the woody species. In this case, we're tree haters and shrub haters. We want to have grasslands for these grasslands species of birds because they're top priority. And the amazing thing is I would not worry about exotic species. They are not a problem. They have not been for us. But to control the aggressive native species. So once again, I want to thank the team over all these years and want to thank you all for coming and thank the array of grassland birds and grassland plants that have all come. And I'm still hoping Eastern Meadowlark and Hensel Sparrow will show up. So thanks very much for your attention. I hope you've enjoyed it.
Well done, Doug.
How long did I take? I hope it took 46 minutes. So I'm happy to have questions.
Hey, Doug.
Yeah.
Doug, this is Robin Toddy. Hi. I was intrigued when you said that the all these 265 species of plants appeared very quickly, and you thought a lot of them were already present in a seed bank.
Yes.
Can you expand a bit on that? How long can a seed bank hold seeds viable? Any idea?
Oh, yeah. Well, yes, we do. Hundreds of years. In fact, there's really no such thing as an annual plant. We always think of annuals and perennials and stuff, but that's broadly not true. The seeds of annual plants that get thrown into the soil from their appearance for 1 year, then sit in the soil for years, and their babies then appear over a broad set of years after. So the annual plants you see the year after are not the ones that produce seed that year. No, they're long-term residents. Some seeds are short, but any batch of seeds that are produced in a particular year, thrown into soil, will then emerge over a broad spectrum of time, decades and hundreds of years later. So it's a totally different mixture. The odd thing, Todd, is that, Robin, I'm sorry, is that I was never taught anything about seed banks in my training. It was never in my ecology textbooks. I didn't teach, Nancy can assure you, I didn't teach anything about seed banks because I hadn't been taught. There was nothing in the books. This was all a startling result for me. Just to elaborate that, we know that because the year 2003 was a super wet year. Rained all the time. Our grasslands were full of lakes and puddles and so on. And all around the edges of those puddles sprang forth aquatic species of plants in neat, beautiful rings, just the way they're supposed to. And I thought this was a prairie. These were all aquatic species coming up in beautiful rings. It was told me, my God, they've been there all the time. And they are the seeds from whenever the last inundation occurred.
Wow.
So that's a long answer too, but no, the seed bank is big and in fact infinite and indefinite.
Yeah, what a wonderful surprise. Yeah, sure.
Oh, it was a surprise to us.
Thanks so much, Doug. Again, I was muted before, so whoopsie. But there are a couple of questions in the chat if you wouldn't mind. Wendy wants to know, what do we know about the historical species composition of earlier grasslands?
Not much. what we know is from reports, actually the journals of some of the early colonists, and I took a big effort to read those to find out what did early North America look like, especially Eastern North America, to answer the owner's invitation of, okay, what habitat should we make? We have long-term resident species of plants, and we have lots of recently introduced stuff. As you saw, we call those recent stuff, exotics and introduced species. But things like purple loosestrife, for example, purple loosestrife we know from cores was present in North America in pre-Pleistocene times. The Pleistocene wiped it out from North America, but it retained its life in North America. Well, the colonists brought purple loosestrife back with them, in the 1700s, because it was a very pretty plant. So all native plant people now hate purple loosestrife because they think it's an exotic, it's an invasive exotic. But no, it was here in, as we know from pollen cores and seed cores from ancient times. And all we're doing is reintroducing it back into North America where it once was, but it was absent. Just like horses, right? Horses, that's where they evolved in North America. They were wiped out entirely, and the Spaniards brought them back. Right?
Thank you. Joseph wants to know, would the grass composition among the plots possibly impact the demise of grasshopper sparrows?
I'm not sure if I understand that. I think I showed you pictures of how broadly across the 228 acres, grasshopper sparrows were nesting, right? 2003, and then it changed a little bit in 2004, for example. But basically, grasshopper sparrows have been on all parts of the grasslands, irrespective of whether they were tall grasses or short grasses, and the rich diversity. But to answer the question perhaps in a different way, as those grasslands matured and the density became very thick and the height of the grass became tall, that's not grasshopper sparrow habitat. Over the past 7 or 8 years, where the grasshopper sparrows were residing was this mowed airstrip, that a 1.5 mile airstrip on the north side of the property. They quit using the maturing grasslands because it was just too thick and too tall. So in that sense, yes, we know that the nature of the grasslands, especially in their more mature state, is not suitable for some species. It's much more preferred. Yellow throats and indigo buntings love the place now. So these are the kind of things you have to take into account as well. I'll just quickly add, every July and August, in come hundreds of bobolink and bank swallows. And the bobolink stay there. They love eating the switchgrass, and they proceed to do all their molting from their black and white plumage into their tan plumage, winter plumage, or primary molt, using our grasslands, using our switchgrass as the place they do that before they head on down to South America. Bank swallows love the insects they're feeding over our bluegrass and big blue stem and switchgrass fields. So there's positive sides of having monocultures of switchgrass and big blue stem for those migratory transient species, but not for a bunch of the breeders.
Mm-hmm. Doug has a question. You're raising your hand.
Yeah, this is Doug. This is Doug's old friend, Doug Fuchima, visiting from New York.
Doug, shame on you.
And we've known one another longer than you can imagine.
Yes.
So when Doug, when you and I were graduate students together at Michigan, the ecologists that we learned from and who were our mentors were fixated on the issue of density-dependent population regulation.
Yep.
And you described an example of that in your bobwhites that you said, grew explosively in numbers and then leveled off. And my question is, do you have any idea what the actual mechanism of that was? Did they produce, fewer offspring? Were they simply dying? Are they territorial? I don't know whether bobwhites are territorial and actively exclude interlopers. What do you
They
think?
do that. No, I certainly invite you at some time to have a good conversation with Dan Small, who's been now studying those bobwhite populations in detail. We have always had a sustained population of bobwhite quail. That's right, as you point out, that was just wiped out by that set of blizzards. But they did reclimb back up to numbers that were equivalent to what they were before. So it sure looks like density dependent coming back to a K sustained level. The details of their breeding success, their survival, the structure of their coveys, the comings and goings of how coveys disperse and then get reassembled is all part of that. The big aspect of what seems to be the density dependent control of bobwhite is their overwintering habitat. They use the grasslands for breeding, but they overwinter in the forests, in the edges. And what we have discovered is that many of the management practices that had been and still ongoing in the forested portions of the property has not been the right thing for bobwhite quail survival over winter. So the population regulation is overwintering habitat in the forests, more than the breeding. Yeah, we have lots and lots and lots of habitat for breeding bobwhite, but their problem is to get through the winter. And just to add quickly, that they don't get very much far north anymore. And I think I know perfectly well why they don't get any further north. The frequency of wipeouts by winter storms, such as that we would have, there's no way that bobwhite can persist in New England with that kind of habitat, those kinds of acute population smashes.
Okay, thank you.
Good to see you.
Yep, same here.
Thanks for coming.
Great talk. Super talk.
Timothy has a question in the chat. He says, great talk. Have you considered how to expand the grasslands to other nearby areas? Perhaps a very large matrix of grasslands stretching over thousands of acres would be the goal.
The answer is, who asked that question?
Timothy.
Timothy, and to everybody else, is an emphatic yes. That one feature of this whole project was an initiative, a brand new experiment. Nobody had ever tried anything like this in the Eastern United States. Our success has led to Dan Small taking a major leadership role in exporting what we have found to private landowners throughout the Eastern Shore, collaborating closely with the Maryland state officials with the properties they have, especially the Milford grasslands that has tigers, salamanders, and the like in it. So yes, as we speak, Dan Small is a major leader in sharing and actively creating new grasslands all over the Eastern Shore, especially Queen Anne's County and Kent County, but now expanded to southern county. So the answer is an emphatic yes. That is a major, thrilling part of this experiment.
Thank you. Karen wants to know, were there any significant changes in nest predation during your research years?
Yes, the answer is to that. As you say, we had as high 63% nest success. It's using the standard simple ratio of how many nests were made and how many survived. And we've been keenly interested in who those nest predators are. Why are some of those nests being lost? We had thought we were doing fabulously. Gosh, hundreds and hundreds of HYs, hatchlings would be all over the fields in July, August, and into September. But nevertheless, as I said, the nesting success was not high enough to sustain that population. Who were the predators? Well, one of the major predators is white-tailed deer. So white-tailed deer. So we set up cameras and they'll watch nests, and yeah, white-tailed deer consider grassland bird nests a delicious snack to eat on. Snakes have been a major predator. We have photos and documentation of snakes of a couple of species actually coming in and going up and eating the nestlings. We've had 2 outbreaks over these 24 years of skunks, where that didn't seem to be plentiful, but then 2 summers they were everywhere, virtually underfoot, and they were chomping down on grassland and especially grasshopper nests. As you know, grasshopper build their nests on the ground underneath the tucks of the bunch grasses. So we've had episodes of predators like skunks, but snakes and deer are the principal one. I should quick add, astonishingly, we've had essentially no cowbird parasitism. This is amazing because cowbird parasitism is common in grasshopper sparrows in the Midwest, but we've had virtually none yet. The cowbirds are parasitizing our blue grosbeaks and our field sparrows and our yellowthroats. So we know they're out there, but for some reason, over the course of this 2-decade study, we had only 2 instances of a cowbird egg being found in a grasshopper sparrow nest. That was a big surprise, really a big surprise.
So interesting. Wendy says, very interesting talk, brings me back to my volunteer days planting the International Crane Foundation and University of Wisconsin's Curtis Prairie. I wonder how your species mix compared to our mix in the 1980s. Would be interested in looking at that.
Not sure if I understand it. Comparing our results, what now to what was in 1980? Was that what's the question? I'm not sure if I got the question.
I think so.
Okay, well, I guess now I pointed out that we have virtually no grasshopper sparrows left. They're just not coming to the suitable habitat we still are making. Dan and Marin have been making excellent habitat for grasshopper sparrows, and they're not appearing, which means that to an interesting level, which I'm analyzing, much of our colony was being sustained by immigrants, by migration, immigrants coming in. It didn't seem that way to us, but the fact that they're not arriving on the grasslands now. So yeah, I've pointed out we don't have grasshopper sparrows. The dickcissels have evaporated from what they were doing. The question was really about the 1980s before we began the study. Was that what the question was? About the 1980s?
She was wondering how the species mix compared to the mix that I guess she planted in the 80s. Are you here, Wendy, to clarify that question?
We planted a grassland out in the International Crane Foundation in Wisconsin in the 80s.
Right. Yeah, I was just wondering how the species, you talked about the rate of species and the mix of plants that you put together to plant. And I was I just thought it would be interesting to compare the original rates of what was planted to what you have now in both, compare what you did and what you have now to what those areas planted and have now. Because I understood that I think it was pretty common to overmix the big blue and the switchgrass, but the Indian grass and side oaks never were dominant to my knowledge.
Well,
So
go ahead.
so I'm just wondering if there's did you start, did they both start out the same, or were you different, or?
Okay, well, let me answer this final way. And we followed recommendations of the Department of Agriculture at the time to use 8 pounds of seeds per acre. And we divided those up into 4 pounds of one species, 2 pounds of another, 2 pounds of another, right? And as I mentioned, the mistake of that recommendation from the Department of Agriculture is it doesn't take into account that some of the species, like Eastern gamagrass, has huge seeds. Their size of, they remind you of chickpeas. So a pound of those is just a couple hundred, whereas a pound of switchgrass are tens of thousands. Tens of thousands. So yes, as simple it is to say pounds per acre, it's idiotic because it doesn't take into account tiny seeds versus big seeds, right?
I see.
So that was a major. We've reported back to the Department of Agriculture and the CRP supervisors to don't do it on the basis of poundage, and get that. If you have other clients, make sure that they have a seeding rate much lower. And we've been pleased that they have been responsive to our recommendations to lower that seed rate and take into account what we've learned of aggressive species, non-aggressive species, big seeded ones, little seeded ones, and so on.
Great, thanks. Is that the Soil Conservation Service?
Well, yes, but that's part of it. It's the large program of the Conservation Reserve Program, the CRP.
Okay.
Conservation Reserve Program, and there are 8 different protocols for different kinds of growing areas, parts of the country. CRP 22, CRP 23, etc. But the Conservation Reserve Program was our principal liaison for getting advice and counsel of how should we proceed with this. It's an important question you asked. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sharon wants to know if you knew Dr. Warren Wagner at the University of Michigan.
Well, Dr. Tuma and I can say we certainly did. One of the great personages of botany in what a honor to have taken his classes in botany at the University of Michigan, and called him up over the years for advice of where to find those marvelous ferns, the hybrid ferns that he was so intense in study. And it was ironic, as probably as many of you know, a long-term curator of botany at the Smithsonian was Warren Wagner. For a couple of years, I was confused. No, it couldn't possibly be Warren Wagner. He's at Michigan. But anyway, the Warren Wagner at Michigan was a thrilling professor and lecturer and field botanist. And yes, the answer is yes.
Are there any other questions? That's all that I see here. I think that might be all for tonight. Thank you so much, Doug.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share this.
Amazing talk. Thank you so much.